Welcome to Candidate Conversations, part of Delaware Debates 2016, produced by Delaware Public Media in collaboration with the University of Delaware's Center for Political Communications and with support from AARP. I'm Delaware Public Media News Director Tom Byrne. This conversation, taped on the campus of Delaware State University, focuses on the race for governor, and we are joined by Libertarian Sean Goward. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with the most basic question. Why did you decide to run for governor?
Well, after serving 16 years in the Air Force and swearing an oath to support and defend the Constitution, taking a look at some of the things that have been happening between the General Assembly, the way that our government's been conducting business, it's becoming increasingly obvious that our government really doesn't pay any respect to constitutional limitations on government, and we're seeing that effect on our children in public education, with high-stakes testing, mandatory reporting of data, sending that data to education companies. I think across the United States we're seeing issues between law enforcement and citizens that are disturbing to the public, and so it's very important to kind of reach out past just the traditional political narrative and kind of bring sanity back to the process and just have another voice in the race.
The governor is the state's chief executive.
Yes, sir.
How would you describe the leadership style that you would bring to the office if you're elected?
Within the construct of the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution, our government is set up with specific checks and balances in order to protect people from the overreaches of government. And so, being cognizant of that, I would be a leader who exercise those checks and balances exclusively on behalf of the individuals in the state of Delaware.
Let's talk about some issues. Start with the budget. State revenue estimates for the coming year don't paint a very rosy picture. Some have suggested looking harder at the spending side of the equation. There's been a fair amount of discussion, even some committees on the revenue side of the equation and how the state can improve its revenue sources. From your perspective, what should the priority be in making sure that Delaware is on sound financial ground and on the right budgetary track?
Well, it's interesting dealing with a government as opposed to a private business, because a government doesn't have any competition to sit there and drive down costs or reduce or improve quality of services. And so I think what we need people who would take that corporate approach and really try to take a look at the way that Delaware executes its business and find ways to both improve services and decrease cost. And looking forward past just the next 4 years or the next 8 years, not only do we have a $4 billion deficit, but we also have about $14 billion in unfunded liabilities that our generation and our children's generation are going to be on the hook for. And we can't keep borrowing against our children's prosperity. So what we need to do is we need to take a look at both sides of the coin. We need to take a look at what we're spending it on, and whether or not it's in the goal of defending life, liberty, and property. And that's really kind of the fundamental philosophy behind your libertarian candidates. And then anything outside of the scope of defending life, liberty, and property is superfluous, and it can generally be done better from a private perspective.
Which I'm going to guess is part of the answer to my next question, but I'll ask it anyway, which is one of the biggest budget issues in the state right now, one of the biggest cost drivers is healthcare costs, both on the Medicaid side and on the state employee health benefits side. Right. What can the state do to address those costs and bring them under control?
Well, a lot of the costs associated with healthcare have been driven by the Affordable Care Act, which has been implemented by the U.S. Congress. But there are certain things where people in other states have been working outside of the system. You've got concierge healthcare services, for example, in Kansas City, Missouri, where doctors are not accepting healthcare. set up their practice almost as a Netflix-style subscription service where you pay $100 to $150 a month, and you get you don't pay co-pays, you don't pay deductibles, you get unlimited visits, you get lab work. They sell prescriptions at cost, cutting out the middleman. And by reducing a lot of the overhead associated with healthcare costs, they've been able to provide a much better service to people on a private basis. And so I think it's really the entrepreneurship and the innovation that we really need to bring to the healthcare market. And if you take a look at other services that are provided associated with healthcare, specifically cosmetic surgery, eye correction surgery, things like that, where you don't have those health insurance companies involved, those prices have dramatically gone down and the quality of those services has increased. And so we have an analogous situation where we see that free market principles work, and they provide patients, their customers, a much better service at a lower cost. Also, health insurance, if we take a look at other private types of insurance, for example, automobile insurance, things like that, your auto insurance doesn't cover things like oil changes or tire rotations, preventative maintenance, and things like that. It really covers the catastrophic things that happen when you're driving on the road. And so if we take the same approach to healthcare, where we have insurance that covers hospitalizations and surgeries and major procedures that could significantly hurt the people of Delaware, then you're going to reduce the amount of cost to the taxpayer, and people are going to have more options available to them at lower costs and at much better quality if the rest of the services that are more routine are either paid for out of pocket or are involved in certain plans and things like that. But we definitely have to be careful to make sure that a lot of our folks who can't afford healthcare coverage are capable of receiving those essential medical services. And so we need to look at a sensible way to kind of transition away to the system where we have now, where Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield is the only private provider in the state of Delaware with no competition, is driving up prices by double digits every year.
Let's talk about the revenue side, and one way to increase revenue is to bring more jobs to Delaware, broaden out the tax base a bit more. Concerns about creating and retaining jobs have been very front and center this year in the state, particularly in the wake of the Dow-DuPont merger. What steps would you take if you were elected to increase wages, economic growth, and create jobs in the first state?
Well, again, I think that the free market really does a great job of driving innovation and entrepreneurship. I mean, if you take a look at the services that, for example, Apple Corporation has provided over the last decade and the improvements there, outside of FCC regulations for telecom, you really haven't had any government influence in what's really been driving their innovation. And they create products that people want, and there's other competitors in the market which drive down costs. Now, likewise, my major concerns with generating revenue have been that we've really kind of given a lot of sweetheart deals to a lot of major corporations in the interest of keeping them in state. But that really puts a lot of the burden on small and medium-sized businesses to sit there and keep that revenue coming in for our state spending. And so a lot of times with these major corporations, they're looking for people with accreditation and degrees, things like that. But we're really putting the burden on the small and medium-sized businesses that really employ a lot of the people that are hurting the most right now. And so I think the first point would be creating accountability and equitability in our tax code system, and making sure that everybody, including our major corporations, pays their fair share. Now, at the same time, I believe it was 2 years ago, there was a lot of interest in the media about a bailout for the casinos in the state.
Yep.
And I had a conversation with Senator Bushweller about that, and our casinos are paying roughly 40% gross receipts tax on top of a 8.9% corporate income tax. And so if you take a look at any business model in this, or any business model in general, if you tax them 50% of their income, they're not really going to have the ability to improve their services and to attract more people to the state to spend money and to do business here in the state. And so we rely on our casinos and a lot of the other businesses in the state for funding in education and funding for a lot of the other state programs. And so, like I said, we really need to take a close and reasonable look and make it equitable across the board, so we're not hurting the people who really create jobs, and that's our entrepreneurs and innovators and the small and medium-sized business level.
Let's move to education. That's also been a contentious issue in the state over the past few years. You laugh, but it's absolutely true. The plans to redistrict Wilmington schools, opting out of state assessment tests, and even just down to the basic of how schools are funded in the state, there seems to be a fairly large number of people who are seriously concerned about the direction of education policy. If you are elected, what do you feel the state should be doing in the area of education to improve it here in the state?
Well, I think what we really need to do is take a look at the reality of the situation. Our education policy across the United States has been driven by the OECD, which is an international group of economic countries who make policy recommendations, and they've been doing it for probably about 20, 30 years now. And the problem is that with the recommendations that they've given us that have driven our federal education policy, they paint a very bleak and dismal picture about how our students are performing and what we're doing. But if you take a look at other indicators, for example, the Nobel Prizes in mathematics and sciences, the Fields Medal in mathematics, the American Association of Architecture, the American Medical Association, if you take a look at any international organization that has international competition for excellence, the United States is far and above the leader in the world as far as innovation in the market. And so if the point of education is to get people college ready or career ready, basically to put them out into the world as responsible citizens and adults, I think we're doing pretty well. So we really kind of have to take with a grain of salt what our federal Department of Education and what the OECD is doing, because when we get compared to countries like China, they have a completely different system of education that's exclusive to the people who are capable of significant academic success, and they exclude other people who don't have the aptitude or the inclination to sit still in class, things like that. They don't include them all the way through high school graduation. And so we're very fortunate here in Delaware and in the United States as a whole, because regardless of scholastic aptitude, we provide that education for our children, and that's an incredible thing. My daughter has gone from having dyslexia to being a consistent honor roll student, and it's exclusively because of the dedication and the hard work of our teachers and our educators, and they're first class. You get one or two here and there that, you know, a lot of times make the news, but by and large they are nothing but concerned for the education and the success of our students, and I think we need to be able to reward that and provide that kind of opportunity. And I think the best way to do that is to push down control of education down to the district level, allow the state to act as an intermediary between the school districts and the federal government for applying for grants, funding, things like that. But by and large, our teachers and our school districts and our administrators need to be accountable to the parents. And that's a precept that's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, who says that children aren't a creature of the state, and it's the responsibility of the parents. So, you know, we need to stop letting our federal government and our State Department of Education act as a proxy for our parents in the role of their children's education.
I want to ask you about violent crime. That's also been a big issue, specifically in Wilmington, but throughout the state. How can you, if elected governor, help reduce violent crime in the state?
The issue with crime as a whole is very nuanced, and over the last 10 years or so, we've seen the advent of the 24-hour news cycle. We've seen the advent of social media, and these 24 access mediums of providing information to people in general have really kind of sensationalized a lot of what's going on. And if you take a look at the Uniform Crime Report issued by the FBI, we've seen a dramatic decrease in violent crimes over the last decade. And so, and I don't say that to marginalize the fact that we do need to be able to address the issues of violent crime, but when you have media on both sides of a debate kind of creating a sense of division among people, whether it's Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, whether it's this group of people versus that group of people, we really get a sense that we're divided, and we try to live up to that standard. And so I think what we need to do is we need to empower people to make decisions that don't lead to violence. I think the public in general, and I think in a lot of circumstances, our law enforcement officials really need to come together and focus on de-escalation of conflict, because the loss of any life to a violent act is unacceptable. And so we need to create that media and that public atmosphere where we're not infighting among citizens. It's not. Campaigning's kind of a unique beast, because it's Republican against Democrat, and then you have this fringe little party of Libertarians who are pointing fingers at both of them. But at the end of the day, we're all citizens of the same state. We're all members of the same community, and we really have to kind of create that atmosphere where we start acting like it. As far as dealing with crime in general, I know that we've got a heroin epidemic here in the state, and I think that a lot of our increased incarcerations and increased law enforcement, the perpetuated war on drugs, has done an incredible amount to not only perpetuate the use of those drugs by creating a black market, by creating more demand for it, but they also deny people the social services to be able to rehabilitate themselves and get treatment. And you take a look a little bit deeper at the social impact. We're tearing families apart for nonviolent crimes, incarcerating a mother or father, taking our children and putting them into social services, when, in all honesty, we could take that funding from corrections, turn a lot of those drug-related crimes over to social services, and probably see a much better impact over our criminal justice system as a whole.
I do want to delve a little bit deeper into the division you were talking about just
Sure.
a moment or two ago, because, I mean, clearly this summer has been one where there has been a lot of tension between law enforcement and the communities that they serve in, both because of the high-profile shootings of individuals by police and obviously the shootings of police officers.
Right.
Is there something is there a role that government can play in building some of that trust back between law enforcement and communities, and building some bridges between the two?
Sure, absolutely. And if you take a look at what Ron Paul described as blowback, we've been involved across the world for more than a century in international politics, and primarily using our military as a form of diplomacy. And serving 16 years in the Air Force, I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've seen firsthand a lot of the carnage that this has done. But we don't really take a look at the fact that we armed the Taliban in the 1980s when they were fighting the Soviets. We don't take a look at the fact that we armed Saddam Hussein when he was fighting against Iran. And so a lot of those dominoes that are lining up and falling over, we just see the last domino and we're kind of scratching our heads. But you take a look at the entire chain, and likewise, our police officers are suffering the same kind of blowback, and a lot of it is a result of targeted policing, of our failed drug war, of the expansion of technology and military-grade hardware into law enforcement. And this mission creep has really kind of created this atmosphere, especially in communities of color, where rather than being peace officers who are there to protect them, the perception is that they're in there targeting them specifically. And so again, you know, having been in the military and having been an instrument of foreign policy, you know, we have incredible people in our military, just like we have incredible people in our law enforcement community. But the responsibility primarily falls on our politicians, on our legislators, on our lawmakers and our executives to sit there and kind of recage the focus of the people that they're responsible for. And so what we need to do is we need a return to community policing. Over the last 35 years, since 1980, we've seen the number of SWAT raids go from 3,000 a year to 80,000 a year. Our Library of Congress has a SWAT team. Our Department of Education, our Federal Department of Education, has a SWAT team, and so and they're getting a lot of their hardware from the federal government through the 1033 program, because you really don't want to waste this material. But at the same time, it's disconcerting to hear government officials out of one corner of their mouth saying that weapons of war don't belong on our streets, but at the other corner of their mouth giving them to, for example, the University of Ohio campus police department. I mean, I think people would be appalled if the Delaware State University Police Department got a Bearcat armored mine-resistant vehicle. So I think it's the responsibility of our elected leaders to really kind of bring back those constitutional protections, to make sure that we acknowledge that people have a right to be secure in their persons, papers, and effects. And just from my standpoint, being in the military, when Abu Ghraib happened, it was a slap in the face to the professionalism of every single soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine. And so we had to come together and as a military community address the systemic issues that led to the inhumane treatment of people like that. And likewise, without demonizing either the citizens in the community who are protesting or demonizing the officers who protect them, we need to take an honest look at our law enforcement and criminal justice policies and figure out exactly where we can sit there and change our philosophical mindset to, again, make sure that everybody contributes to maintaining the peace.
Sean Goward, Libertarian candidate for governor. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
You got it. You can find all of our candidate conversations online at DelawarePublic.org and DelawareDebates.org. Candidate conversations are taped at Delaware State University and are part of Delaware Debates 2016, produced by Delaware Public Media in collaboration with the University of Delaware's Center for Public Communication and with support from AARP. Thanks for watching.